Or you were doing it?
Recording now.
There we go. So hi everyone, welcome to our Second Nature Plant-Based 101 webinar. My name's Amy. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm a health coach at Second Nature. And I would definitely consider myself plant-based since I don't eat meat, fish or dairy and try my best to get as many plants in as possible. Yeah, and that's probably a nice little summary about me since we're already on 6 o'clock. So I'll let Kirsty introduce herself.
Sure, I'm Kirsty. I am a registered nutritionist. I am predominantly plant-based. I do eat eggs if I know the source, and the source is rescue hens. And I do on occasion eat fish, but for the most part, I am plant-based. And you might know Amy and I because we ran the vegan and vegetarian community for quite a long time up until the end of last year.
That's a really good point that I totally missed. Thanks, Kirsty.
Right.
Okay, so anyone let me know if the slides are just going bananas, okay, because I'm going to be over here blissfully unaware. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, the objective of today's webinar is to cover the fundamentals of plant-based eating. So what it is, what the benefits are, the challenges, and how you can be more plant-based yourself, if that's something you're interested in, which I'm guessing it might be why you're here. So we'll talk through how to obtain the right amount of nutrients for optimal plant-based eating, and we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So what is a plant-based diet? So it is predominantly a diet predominantly, should I say, based upon plants. So either predominantly or exclusively plants, with few or no ingredients that come from animals. So that includes our vegetables, our whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and fruits. And plant-based diets can support healthy living at every age and every life stage. But as with any diet, we need to plan them properly to make sure that we are hitting all of those nutrient targets to make sure we're as healthy as we can be. So diets are often categorized, and here's what kind of each of these categories mean. The first three are all kind of vegetarian. So we've got the lacto-ovo vegetarians, which eat dairy and eggs, but no meat, poultry or seafood. We've got the ovo-vegetarians, which eat eggs, but avoid all other animal products. We've got lacto-vegetarians, which eat dairy foods, but exclude eggs, meat, poultry and seafood. Then we've got the pescatarians that eat fish and avoid all other animal products. Then we've got flexi-vegetarians or flexitarians or semi-vegetarians who eat a little bit of everything. And then we've got vegan as well, which is a lifestyle, not just a diet. So eat no animal products, but additionally don't use any products that have been tested on animals, that come from animals, that have kind of got anything to do with animals. This is just kind of an overview. There's no need to put a category or a label on your dietary preferences, and any of these dietary patterns can be plant-based and therefore can be healthy. On the flip side, each of these categories also can be unhealthy. So it's the quality within those kind of dietary patterns that matters the most. Okay, so if you're plant-based in the UK, let's just give a little bit of background. So if you've been considering increasing your plant intake or reducing your animal products, you might like to know that you're not completely alone in that. So it's estimated that just over kind of 1% of the UK population follow an entirely vegan diet. This number actually quadrupled between 2014 and 2019, which is wild. The vegetarian diet is followed by 5 to 7% of the UK population. But when you think of that in numbers, there's a lot of people. And then there's a recent survey that discovered 46% of Brits between 16 and 75 are considering reducing their meat intake in the future. So we're likely to see changes in those other two figures over the coming years as well. And these changes are becoming more and more reflective in our food environments. You can see that little bonus fact at the bottom there, that Deliveroo reported a 115% increase in the demand for plant-based meals between 2019 and 2021, which coincides with a certain pandemic as well, I believe. So I think we all became a little bit more health conscious during that time. So why might someone choose a plant-based diet? So many people choose plant-based diets for so many different reasons. So the rise in plant-based eating's kind of been attributed to, I think the more obvious ones are going to be animal welfare, their personal health, and concerns about the environment. So that could be concerns about the ethical treatment of animals and the sustainability of our current food system. There's health benefits associated with including more plants and whole foods and fewer ultra processed foods, and that's fairly well understood by us all. That's kind of our basics of healthy eating, to really simplify it. And not only for kind of improved general well-being, but also prevention and management of some health conditions as well, which we will come back onto shortly. And the environmental concerns, such as reducing carbon footprint and eating more sustainably for the future of the planet, that's been talked about a lot more as well in recent years. So that might be what's driving some people to reduce their meat intake, or not just their meat intake, but increase their plant intake as well. And eating truly plant-based and purchasing whole, natural and typically seasonal foods can keep the cost of healthy eating lower as well. So a research study out of Oxford University has suggested that the shift towards plant-based eating can actually reduce your food bill by up to 1/3. So there are plenty of things out there that could boost your food bill, but I think if you're being clever about it, if you're being well planned about it, you're looking in all the right places and opting for the cheaper options like the seasonal foods, then it is completely possible that you might even reduce your food bill. And then for some people, plant-based eating is just personal preference for any reason that's not any of the other ones we've mentioned. So it might just even be the way that you've kind of been brought up, and it's just the way you're going to keep going. So it's just completely personal preference as well. It doesn't have to be for any of those other reasons. So are plant-based diets healthier? The short answer, but the non-conclusive answer, is they can be. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but diets centered on a wide variety of plant foods, they do offer affordable, tasty, nutritious, healthy options. So if they're plant-based, rich in beans, nuts, seeds, fruit, vegetables, whole grains such as our oats, barley, quinoa, and then those minimally processed foods can provide all the nutrients that we need to be healthy. It has been recognised that a diet centred around plants can be an intervention to support improved health outcomes as well. It might help reduce risks of things like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and it can help with weight management as well. So if you are reducing foods that come from animals or cutting them out altogether, then there are a few nutrients that you do need to pay attention to. So any dietary pattern does require a balance of all key macro and micronutrients. So particularly when changing your diet, if you're increasing certain things, you might be reducing others. It's worthwhile to consider where you're getting those nutrients from. So there has been research kind of examining nutritional status of like vegan diets and vegetarian diets, which are typically more plant-based, and have found individuals to be deficient in several key nutrients. And the World Health Organization, I really like how they describe micronutrients, which are like your vitamins and minerals, as magic wands, as they enable the body enzymes, hormones, and other substances needed for like our health and development. So just kind of highlighting how important they are on every level. And I've mentioned this already, but the British Dietetic Association, their guidelines highlight that if we're following a plant-based diet, then it's important to take consideration to the nutrients I've actually popped on this slide here as well. So either getting them through relevant food sources, or if that's not always possible, then supplementation where needed, which we will cover in more detail later on. Kirsty's going to go over that with you all. So are plant-based diets healthier? The bottom line is that well-considered plant-based eating can be really, really healthy. But just because it's plant-based doesn't automatically make it healthier. So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty now, and she's going to talk through how to get all the nutrients we need to make sure that we have got that healthy plant-based diet.
Thanks for that lovely introduction, Amy. I'm going to start by talking about protein, and then I'm going to move on to all of the other nutrients. So there's a lot to take in here. I'm going to cover it in as much detail as I can given our time frame. And I'm going to answer some of the questions that have already come in to us as we go. But you might want to watch this webinar back and pause it and take notes, because I will be going through things at a faster rate than I would want to. So brace yourselves. Okay. Amy? Right. So what do we need protein for in the body? Well, the answer is everything. When we think of protein, we always think of muscles, but what we forget is that Every single cell in the body requires protein to function. Our red blood cells require hemoglobin to transport your oxygen. Every immune cell in the body is made from protein. Every reaction in the body requires an enzyme, which is a protein. Insulin as a hormone is a protein. It is needed in every single system, from your neurotransmitters all the way through. And so it really is an essential nutrient, something that we really should be focusing on a plant-based diet. So what are the plant-based proteins? So obviously we have pulses, beans, soy being one of the most commonly used one, nuts and seeds, mycoprotein, which for those of you that don't know what corn is, it is a fungus-derived protein. We've got protein powder, which I'm going to mention in a moment because a question came in on that. And for the future, and what's really being worked on a lot at the moment is, and it's going to be interesting to see what people think of it, is growing animal meat within a lab, so there is no harm to animals, but it is in essence grown genetically from animals, and there's a lot going on with that globally currently. But what we really shouldn't forget is that we can actually get a lot of protein from grains and from vegetables and other food sources. So quinoa and spelt are really great sources as well. In terms of protein powder, people always ask me about this, and I was asked by one of my lovely members, Inga, to mention this tonight because she wanted to know. So protein powder can be an amazing addition to your diet. I always recommend an unflavored protein powder, so you're not getting the sweeteners and the additives and the flavorings and the preservatives. People ask me what I use. I use the British Hemp Company protein powder. Why? Because it's got all of the essential amino acids that I'll be talking about in a moment, and it's got a lovely nutty taste, and all that's in there is hemp really finely ground, so it's a really nice addition. But there's pea proteins, fava bean proteins, rice proteins, they're all great vegan options. Soy, if you can tolerate it as well, is a great vegan protein powder. So can I get adequate protein from a plant-based diet? The simple answer is yes. But what we really have to think about is the quality of protein and the quantity of protein that we're getting. Next slide. So when we talk about the quantity, what we're talking about is the amount of protein that is in that food in general. And when we talk about the quality, we're talking about something called the amino acid profile. Now, if you imagine that protein is made up of lots of different little building blocks, and there's 20 different building blocks, 9 of which we cannot make in the body. So it's essential we get them in the diet. And so we call them the essential amino acids. And each of these has a different function in the body. And so it's important that we have them all. Next slide, Amy. So first of all, I just want to focus on the quantity. So when we compare plant-based to animal products, you can see cheese has 26 grams of protein in 100 grams, lean meat around 20. So they're sort of the higher end. So no food is like 100% protein, really. In fact, a really good protein powder can provide you with more protein per gram than some of these foods, because a lot of them contain a lot of water, a lot of fat, a lot of other constituents. You can see here we've got sunflower seed at 20 grams. What I want to point out here is that's a really high amount of protein, but how much sunflower seed would you have on your plate? So while there's 20 grams in 100 grams of product, you might only have about 25 grams of sunflower seed in your dish, which means that's about 5 grams of protein. Quinoa is quite high, nuts are high, beans and pulses, and then it starts to drop a little. So the first thing it's really important to think about is how much protein does the food contain? It might say, oh, it's a source of protein, but how much protein is actually in that product in the serving that you're having on your plate? Amy? And then the next thing we think about is the quality. Now, as I mentioned, we need these essential amino acids, and there's lots of different ways. I tend to use the PDCAAS scale. There's other scales to determine how many of those essential amino acids are in that food type. So on this scale, if a food is given a score of 1, it is what we call a complete protein. A complete protein is a food that contains all 9 essential amino acids. So you can see whey, egg, and fish are all a score of 1, as is soy. So soy is the only plant-based protein source that is complete, except hemp as well. And then you've got chicken and beef a little lower, and then you can see it sort of starts to drop down as we work through the plant-based proteins. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have these foods. It means that if we are having some of the foods that aren't a complete protein, we have to think about how we can combine them to make sure that on our plate we have a complete protein option. Amy?
Can I just jump in there? Just we had a great question from Leanne about where quinoa comes in. Is that a complete protein?
It's pretty high up there. Yeah, it's almost complete. You can see, well, I actually go into quinoa in a second when I talk about the limiting amino acids, because quinoa is a great addition to any plate, and I'll explain why. So we know that soy is a complete protein, so having some soy options, so tofu, tempeh, edamame, they are great additions to a plate if you can tolerate soy, because they are complete proteins. Amy? But as I mentioned, there are certain amino acids, so certain little building blocks that are not present in certain foods. So when there is an amino acid that isn't present in a certain food, we refer to that, and you'll see it referred to this when you're reading about eating protein, as a limiting amino acid. It is limiting the completeness of that food. And usually 2 of the most limiting amino acids are lysine. We don't get lysine in grains, nuts, and seeds, and methionine, which is the limiting amino acid in beans and legumes. So how do we get around that? Simple. We combine grains with legumes on the plate, and then suddenly we have a complete protein. So examples of this might be rice with beans, rice with peas, dal with rice, whole wheat bread with hummus. So lots of different options for you to consider what you've got on your plate, and making sure you've got a combination of foods if any particular food is limited in its amino acids. Amy? So I've put a list here of the sources of lysine and the sources of methionine, and you can see quinoa is on both lists. So in terms of these 2 amino acids, quinoa is a great choice because it's got both. Okay, so it's a really great source of protein. Of all the grains, if you're thinking like, what grain should I have on my plate to make up my quarter of the plate carbs, if you go with quinoa, you're really doing yourself a favor from the fiber to the protein to the nutrients that it contains. Next slide. So I've just put a little suggested menu together for you here based on what I've said. So you might have for breakfast like some coconut or soy yogurt, or a chia pudding with some berries, additional nuts and seeds. You can make quinoa porridge as well. Really plugging the quinoa tonight. I do not work for, or are not affiliated with, any quinoa farm. Lunch might be like coconut dal with brown rice or quinoa, spinach and roasted cauliflower. Dinner might be like a nut and lentil roast with roasted root vegetables. Anyone else dribbling at the sound of my menu? I think it sounds amazing. I've put some snack ideas there too. If anyone has noticed the dark chocolate nut balls, if you go to the recipes community in the app and search energy balls, my recipe will come up for you. Homemade seed crackers with a homemade vegan cream cheese, which we'll be talking about later. So there's lots of options here. Next slide. And then we've also got to think about the processed factor in plant-based meat. So on this slide, the foods more to the left are the more processed, and the foods to the right are the least processed. That doesn't mean you can't eat the foods on the left. Everyone loves a Beyond Burger every now and then. It's fine. It's what we would consider an occasional food, and trying to make what's on the right-hand side as more of your everyday. Next slide. So I'm now going to work through each of the nutrients and just give you a little overview of them and some thoughts. So the first is B12. So B12 is essential for healthy function of the nervous system and maintenance of red blood cells. It works very closely with folate. We get it from nutritional yeast, from Marmite if you're a lover, fortified milks and yogurt, cereals. The question comes up all the time about, should I supplement? I would say if you are vegan or if you are vegetarian, but you feel that you do not eat many animal products, you should supplement with B12. The British Dietetic Association recommends 10 micrograms daily, but there is research that shows a little more than that can be beneficial to maintain adequate levels. Now, what I want to say here, and I'm going to say this before I work through each of these nutrients, is test, don't guess. If you can, contact your GP and ask to be tested. Explain that you're vegan and that you want to know what your B12 level is because you want to know if you should be supplementing. Okay, so always check with your GP and always get tested. I'll tell you which of these nutrients you can get tested through the NHS. B12 is one of them. We did have a question on that. It's all right, you can leave, which was on the V1 supplement from the Vegan Society. Now, what's always important with any supplement is that it has been independently verified, or that you have looked into the supplement, spoken to the company and found out about their quality assurance to ensure that the supplement is what it says on the tin, because ultimately every supplement company is trying to get you to buy their products. You've got to make sure that the company that you're using is validated, is evidence-based, is quality assured. But in terms of the levels that I've mentioned through here, the V1 supplement is fine, and you might want to support the Vegan Society if you are vegan. So, but do maybe speak to them about their quality assurance processes. Next slide. So vitamin D, essential, of course, for bones, but it's also really important for immune function and for gut wall integrity. You can leave mushrooms in the sun and they will soak up some vitamin D, so they're a good source, and then fortified foods as well. In the UK, regardless of whether you are vegan or not, it is recommended that you supplement from October to April with a minimum 10 micrograms a day. You may want to go in with a higher dose than this if you live in a high altitude, if you are housebound, or if for cultural or religious reasons you cover when you go outside. So I would again say test, don't guess, to get the dosage right, and the doctor can definitely guide you on this if it turns out that you're vitamin D deficient. Next. So K2 supports vitamin D function, and it also prevents blood clotting in the body. It is predominantly found in meat sources, but we can get it from natto or other fermented foods, and the gut microbiome can make K2 from K1, which comes from dark green leafy vegetables. You might want to consider supplementing at 200 to 300 micrograms per day, but you should not supplement with K2 if you are taking blood thinners. So speak to your GP if that is the case. So anyone on warfarin, you should not be taking any form of vitamin K. Next. So omegas is one that comes up quite a lot, which is why I like my little hemp here, you know, because it's packed full of ALA. So when we talk about omega-3, we're talking about ALA, which is alpha-linolenic acid, EPA, which is eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, which is docosahexaenoic acid. How I said all that, I do not know. But basically, you've got to imagine in the body, we start with ALA, there's a few different conversions, it becomes EPA, there's another conversion, it becomes DHA. So we can get a lot of ALA in the diet through walnut, hemp, chia, flax. What we have to note is that the conversion rate from ALA to DHA is not great, okay? And we do need omega-3. It is an essential amino acid, essential in the diet because we cannot make it in the body. And it's essential anti-inflammatory to support the immune system. It's essential for cell membrane production. It's essential for the brain. If you eat seaweed, that is a DHA source of omega-3. I would say if you are vegan or if you are vegetarian and do not eat fatty fish, you should probably consider supplementation. The research supports anywhere from 250 to 1,000 milligrams each of DHA and EPA daily. The brand I use is Bare Biology. They are quality assured. They've got a fantastic vegan product, which is high dose. So that's my preferred brand. That's what I use. Next slide. Just want to check. I thought a question came in. Yeah, okay. I think I've answered that about how much to take. Okay, calcium. So we need calcium for all sorts of things, for our hearts to beat, for our blood to clot, for our healthy bones and teeth. There are lots of plant sources, and you should be fine in terms of your calcium level. The RNI for calcium, that's the recommended nutrient intake, is 700 milligrams a day. If you're concerned, you should speak to your GP. Again, you can be tested for this. Now, we had a question on this from someone who said that she's thinking about taking calcium and vitamin D because her mother had osteoporosis, and she's been advised to get a blood test. I would absolutely say get a blood test. She said that will only show my levels at the moment. It won't show how things might develop. No, but as we get older, our need changes. And so we should really be testing quite regularly to see what our need is, because what your need is today might not be what your need is in 5 years' time. She also mentions that in the article, and I'm going to talk about bioavailability in just a few minutes, but about how calcium can inhibit iron. And this is true. In the world of minerals, there is a pecking order. Calcium sort of knocks iron off its little pedestal. Iron knocks zinc down. Zinc and copper are in a bit of a battle. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about bioavailability. Next slide. Iron, of course, really essential. It transports the oxygen around the body in the hemoglobin. We know that there's lots of plant-based sources. It says there consider phytates. I'll be talking about that when I mention bioavailability. But what's important to note here is all of these sources are what we refer to as non-heme iron. That is non-meat iron. And non-heme iron is much less bioavailable than heme iron. So sometimes we need to give it a little bit of a nudge to get it into the body. And there's a few things we might need to not have with it in order to make the most of absorbing the iron in it. So I'll come on to that in bioavailability. In the UK, for men, the recommended intake daily is 8.7 milligrams. For women, 14.8 due to menstruation. With iron, supplementation should always be based on your blood results because iron can also be toxic in the body. Next slide. Okay, zinc, lovely zinc does everything in the body. It's got about 300 different functions, but the main ones are immune function, fertility and reproduction, and DNA synthesis. Lots of soy as sources there, but beans, nuts, seeds, berries. The recommendation again is 7.5 to 9 milligrams daily. You should get adequate zinc from a plant-based diet, but again, zinc can be impacted by phytates in food, which I'll mention when I talk about bioavailability. Iodine is one that comes up a lot. It's a bit of a forgotten nutrient, really, and it's something that we see a lot as a deficiency in people who are plant-based vegan. It's essential for thyroid function and metabolism. You can get iodine from seaweed, from crops that are grown closer to the sea, from fortified plant-based products, and from iodized salt. Whether or not you supplement is something you may want to discuss with your GP. Depending on the type of thyroid issue you have, it can be really helpful or really harmful, so it's worth speaking to your GP. about whether or not you should take iodine. The recommended daily intake is 150 micrograms a day. And again, that product that somebody asked me about earlier on the Vegan Society website does have that as its dosage. Choline is another one that no one really thinks of, and it's so important, and it's particularly important for anyone out there who is plant-based vegan or plant-based vegetarian and they're thinking to get pregnant, because choline is essential for the fetal brain. So it's really important for the brain, the nervous system, production of essential fats and metabolism. You can get it from soy, cruciferous vegetables, beans, quinoa and nuts. You should maybe consider supplementing. You can get soy lecithin powder, which you could use in a smoothie, for example, as a way to top up. If you're vegetarian and you eat eggs, or if you're pescatarian and you eat eggs and fatty fish, you're likely getting enough choline. Next slide. And this is my last slide, and I'm so sorry. I know I really went through that at speed, so you're probably going to have to watch it back on a slow speed. But what is really important is talking here about bioavailability. And what do we mean by this? So this is our ability to take the minerals from the food we eat, separate it from the fibers in the food, and then absorb it into the body. And we have little substances. So we've got tannins, we've got oxalates, we've got phytates that have unfortunately been named anti-nutrients. They do have functions, but something that they do that hinders us as humans is bind to these minerals and draw them all the way through the body and out the other side, so we don't get to absorb them. So an example is lentil, which is a source of non-heme iron, but it also contains phytates, and they inhibit the absorption of iron in the gut. Tannins in tea can inhibit iron absorption. So I saw the first question on the Q&A there. I don't know where it's gone, down the bottom. Oh, someone asked a question about iron deficiency.
Yeah,
You answered that.
It was Ruth, and I think what you've just mentioned there has hopefully helped answer that question, but around being currently anemic and on the 3rd month of iron, what can we do?
Yeah.
We're doing our best to support that iron intake.
So if you're having heme iron at a meal, don't have a cup of tea with it. If you're having heme iron at a meal, don't have a glass of milk with it. Have some vitamin C with it, would be my top tip to try and get your iron level up. The body's quite interesting though, because the body, an interesting fact is that when we become pregnant, the body just automatically goes, oh, I'll absorb more iron then. And it's like, well, why can't you do that all year round? Why do you just have to wait until I'm pregnant? So the body has mechanisms. So it's a very tightly regulated nutrient, thought to be because actually pathogenic bacteria can thrive on iron, which is why there's no iron in breast milk as the microbiome is developing in the gut. So it's very tightly regulated in the body. So again, you know, not having that cup of tea as you're having your meal, give it half an hour either side might be one way to do it. Caffeine can inhibit calcium absorption. So there are ways in which these anti-nutrients can inhibit. Cooking, milling, soaking and fermentation can reduce that anti-nutrient content. So steaming and blanching vegetables can increase the bioavailability of iron. So again, instead of raw spinach, try steaming it. That will get the phytate level down. And reduce phytate content in lentils and chickpeas by soaking them for 12 hours. So a nice soaked and cooked dal with some nice steamed spinach, and you're going to get more of the iron that you want. And then we pair things up. So we know that vitamin D is really helpful to iron for absorption. So if we can have a meal where there's some vitamin C and some iron, then that's going to help with the absorption. And again, as I mentioned, that pairing of proteins to make sure that overall the meal is complete. That is it from me. I'm going to hand back to Amy, who's going to give you loads of top tips on this. And we'll come back to the questions in the Q&A that Nat hasn't answered.
Thank you, Kirsty. That was like whistle stop tour through nutrients. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I loved that. Okay, dokie. So tips on how to be more plant-based if that's something you are looking to do. Oh, now I have to do both and things aren't happening. There we go. So my first tip is to start small. Keep it realistic and achievable. So essentially don't change everything all at once. The more radical the changes we make and the further we kind of move away from things we usually do, the more resistance we tend to feel, which eventually leads to not enjoying it particularly much. And then what happens when we stop enjoying something? We generally stop bothering to do it, because who wants to do anything that's not enjoyable? So start small, maybe opt for one plant-based day per week. You might have heard of meat-free Mondays that a lot of people do. It's been around a few years now. You could decide to have plant-based lunches, say Monday to Friday, or you could pick certain days of the week where dinner might be plant-based. Or you could even focus on increasing plants one meal at a time. So you might just think, how can I increase my plant intake for breakfast this week, or for lunch, or for dinner? The meal is your choice. So yeah, my first tip is to start small, keep it realistic, keep it achievable, do not change everything all at once. My second tip is to adapt your favorite meals. So kind of similarly to my last point, minimize the resistance. So don't try and change all of your usual meals and follow all new recipes all at once. You're just creating more work for yourself. But you might instead want to just simply adapt the ones you already know and love. So you could start by adding more vegetables to your usual meals, like adding broccoli to your mac and cheese maybe, or put a side of greens on your curry, steaming your spinach on Kirsty's tip. And you might like to go kind of 50-50 with your meat if you're looking to reduce your meat intake and up your plants. So you could swap 50% of, say, minced beef in your chili or your bolognese and add lentils or beans or something like that. So you could almost make a bit of a hybrid. So you decrease one and increase the other. If you're looking to reduce your dairy, you could swap your usual cheese sauce for a dairy-free cashew-based sauce, which Kirsty has incredible recipes for. And if you're feeling really brave, you could even swap your scrambled eggs for scrambled tofu. My third tip is think about adding things rather than taking things away. So feeling restricted, as I mentioned, or as if you're going without, is a surefire way to feel pretty resentful about changes that you're making. So don't think about removing things, think about what you're adding instead. So let's say if you added chickpeas to your chicken curry as it currently exists, add some chickpeas. You'll likely naturally reduce the amount of chicken you use in time anyway, even if not straight away, but you're instantly adding plants and you're adding something new and you're making that meal, giving it more variety, making it a bit more exciting, changing things up a little bit. So if you think about your last meal, consider what you could do next time to make it a little more plant-based. What would you do? So maybe what you had for dinner if you've already done dinner, or what you had for lunch today. Tip 4, prioritize whole natural foods over substitutes where possible. So this is where lines can become a bit blurry and where terms like vegan and vegetarian and plant-based can all be used a bit interchangeably. So you can eat a vegan or vegetarian diet and not be particularly plant-based. You could eat a diet consisting of breakfast cereal, crisps, pizza, biscuits, takeaways, and not see a plant. But you can also include meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, and still be predominantly plant-based. It's all about the kind of composition of your diet across the board. So if you're thinking about reducing animal products, it can be tempting to switch like for like to the processed alternative for that food. So when Kirsty mentioned we had the left to right and you had kind of, I don't mean to pick on the Beyond Burger, but it was far left, is your processed alternative to meat. And then on the other side, you've got your lentils. It can be tempting to just say, I would have had a burger tonight. Instead of that burger, I'm going to have this plant-based burger. Well, it's not plant-based burger, it's a vegan burger. Rather than adding, it's not increasing your plant intake. It's just swapping like for like on that kind of processed front. So things like meat replacement burgers, sausages, mock meats and fish, dairy-free cheese, all of which are absolutely fine to include on occasion, but certainly shouldn't be prioritized over whole plant-based foods, especially where our protein sources are concerned. And then tip 5 is strive for variety. So a variety of different plant-based food is always best. So not only does it keep things fresh, new, interesting, you can also soak up all of the different flavors, textures, and nutrients, and even different variations within the same foods that's on offer, like beans, like different beans offer different things. So with a rise in the interest and understanding of our gut microbiome, we also recognise that our gut thrives on variation as well. So mix things up, try new things, and opt for all the different colours and flavours and everything else that the plant can offer, that plants can offer as well. So the more variety you add in, the more you're going to get all the different nutrients and just the different enjoyment that comes with all those foods as well, in terms of flavours and cooking and things like that. So final thoughts. As we know, plant-based diets can mean different things to different people, from 100% vegan to flexitarian with a plant focus. The bottom line is that most of us probably could do with eating more plants. So that's your fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and then less foods that are highly processed. That doesn't mean you have to follow a vegetarian or a vegan diet or put a label on it at all. Natasha, I'm going to hand over to you, and you're going to talk a little bit about second nature for anybody who doesn't already know.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. That was really helpful, and we'll go through the questions at the end. So if anyone wants to just hear a bit more about second nature, because I'm aware that, you know, we'll have some people who are already second nature members here, but maybe some people who aren't. So if you just want to head over to the next slide, Amy. Oh, that's okay. So yeah, second nature is a program that makes healthy living second nature. That is our aim, to support people in making the dietary changes that create that balance and, like I said, make that healthy living second nature. So you will be paired with a coach, and you will have access to a program and communities that support you along your journey. So yeah, you might have heard Kirsty and Amy referring to communities within the app, but you'll also have access to a dedicated health coach who is either registered nutritionist or dietitian to support you in changing your lifestyle habits and behaviours. And we really do take a holistic approach to this. So yeah, making sure that we're covering all aspects and areas of health too. And I've just also popped on, so yeah, you can follow us on social media there, or if you want to follow the link to sign up, you can follow the link that's on the screen there. And I've also just popped in the chat for the next slide, our next webinar, which is going to be an amazing topic with Naomi, which is all about bread and separating fact from fiction. So if you're keen to learn more about that, you can sign up in the link that I've just posted in the chat. Fab. So if we move on to some of the questions. So I know, Kirsty, you've answered some of them, but it'd be great to go through some of them live too. So I know Teresa has mentioned around chickpea pasta. Has anyone tried this? Is that a good sort of swap for people? Can it help get more protein in? Is it nice? What are your thoughts on chickpea and like lentil pasta?
So generally speaking, chickpea and lentil pasta, first of all, they're 50% carbohydrate as opposed to 70% carbohydrate, which wheat-based pastas or rice-based pastas would be. So in terms of your carb intake, to slightly reduce that down, they're great. And then they do have more protein. The highest protein pasta is soy pasta or black bean pasta. I think Lidl's do a black bean pasta and a soy pasta, and that is really low carb, really high protein.
Lovely. And then, so I really like Jacqueline's question. So if you're looking to move, if this is something that you're keen to do, move from an animal to a plant-based diet, should you do it gradually so that the body adjusts to those changes?
So I answered that, and Amy can maybe pick up on this one, but I answered that by saying I would do it gradually so you can adapt to the changes. And learn about which plant-based foods you like and which you don't like and how long they take to cook. And Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that one. It's definitely about you adjusting. And I think not only like in the kitchen and in your lifestyle and things like that, but if you have a sudden uptake in plants, which tend to be higher in fibre, you can get a little digestive discomfort to start off with as well. So slowly does it is probably a nice way to go. But yeah, absolutely agree with you, Kirsty, like tweaking. I think I mentioned it in one of my tips, you know, start where you are and tweak from there rather than just kind of overhauling overnight and changing everything all in one swoop. Just do it more gradually for multiple reasons, really.
Yeah, and I also think it makes it a little bit more sustainable, doesn't it? Like you said, Amy, removing those labels and takes us away from like any all or nothing thoughts. You know, you don't have to do it. The small changes can really add up and be really beneficial to our health.
Definitely.
Louise had a really great question around child-friendly. I guess like it could be great for child-friendly ideas for a plant-based daughter who is quite picky. So any of your favorite sort of balanced plant-based meals?
I would say with this one is start with her, I think you said daughter, start with their favorite meals and see how you can adapt those to start off with. So start with what you know she likes, rather than meeting that resistance with something that looks different, tastes different, smells different, where she's instantly going to be like, I don't want that, without even trying, because that's what kids do. Start with what she knows and see what you might be able to either slip in there, put alongside it, see if you can offer anything alongside. And in some cases you can sneakily hide certain vegetables or something like that, depending on what the meal is. But yeah, I'd start with her favorite meals and see if you can get anything else in there.
Yeah, things go ahead, Kirsty.
Oh, I was just going to say smoothies are your friend, soups are your friend, sauces are your friend, to get more nutrients in. Protein powder, if you're concerned about her protein intake. Did you say she's a meat eater? She's possibly okay with protein, but if you're moving her more plant-based, disguise. You've already told her Santa exists and the tooth fairy, so just, you know, cheeky little lie.
Just dice the mushrooms up real small.
Yeah, or like things like grating carrots into sauces. I know that's a top tip, but it's so easy, and actually it can make the sauce taste even nicer because it's quite sweet. And like adding things in before taking things out, you know, can you add in maybe like a bit of tofu with chicken before gradually reducing the chicken? If that makes sense.
Yeah, sauces are a really good way to go as well. Like if somebody likes a tomato-based pasta sauce, if you were to make your own, tomato's familiar already, it's still going to be red, it's still going to taste of tomato, but you can probably get some like onion in there, garlic, peppers maybe, and like blend up a sauce. It's nice and smooth as well. There's no one having to chew any new food or anything like that, and it's just kind of, like Kirsty said, disguised rather than hidden, which sounds more sneaky.
Yeah. Fab. And then there were some questions in the chat too, mainly around what you were saying on just gonna have to scroll up, mainly around what you were saying around how you were cooking and preparing pulses and lentils and things like that. So are tinned lentils okay? Does that increase or decrease the phytates in it? If you pressure cook them, what does that sort of do to it?
I'm just actually looking for some information because that's a really interesting question. I think having tinned lentils that are soaking, you would assume that the phytate level would decrease. So that would be my assumption. I can't find anything to specify that. One study shows that canned beans have lower phytate level than dry unsoaked beans, indicating that the canning process may be of benefit. There you go.
Yeah.
One study though, but that's all I've got.
So I guess that's
it's logical, isn't it? Makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess like to be confirmed, maybe a bit more research into that area, to understand a bit more about that. And then Joe's also asked, quinoa flakes, are they as good as the whole grain?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And then some other questions around so balanced meals. So we've still got a bit more time, but some worries around feeling that you might overeat nuts and seeds. And I guess this is quite a common thing that we tend to see, because nuts and seeds are quite high in fat. Maybe if you tried to lose weight or change your diet before, that's something that's perhaps been off limits. But did you have any thoughts on how to feel more comfortable incorporating those types of foods into your diet?
Nuts and seeds specifically? Yeah, I think if you come from a background of, you know, probably having nuts and seeds a bit kind of vilified as being high fat or high calorie or anything like that, then it's definitely something that I think you have to work with over a period of time just to trust it. And I think in terms of getting started is start small again, really. And just see where you can add them in a small way, just so you begin to feel comfortable with them.
Yeah.
So like I chuck things like cashews are always on a curry for me, or sesame seeds are always on something. So it's just having a spoonful here or there. So you've got that fat in there as well to balance your meal. And you're also not going straight in and kind of potentially uncomfortable serving sizes for you, because you've got that kind of, maybe you've got that history of thinking like this is a bit daunting. So yeah, again, start small and then learn to trust it over time.
If it helps you to trust the mighty nut, there's been some amazing research over the years. There's been studies around, so 2013 studies around eating nuts regularly, extending lifespan, and then a Harvard study came out a couple of years ago, again eating more walnuts and longer life expectancy. So, you know, nuts are your friend. Now, we've all got this sort of fat phobia that's been ingrained in us, but actually nuts contain omegas, vitamins, minerals, fiber, protein. Like, they're so nutritious. I say if you're not sure, grind them down into a powder and put them in your porridge, so that you're getting them without even realizing, and you're bulking out the nutrients in that meal. That's my top tip for nuts and seeds.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly what I was going to say. You know, either whether that's portioning them out, or like you said, incorporating them in meals and sprinkling.
Susan has said it was more trusting me not to overeat them because they are tasty. That is also a problem.
I have the same problem. Yeah. And again, I think, sorry, Nat.
No, I was just going to say, hopefully incorporating them into a meal can be one way of making sure that you get that hit of like tastiness without feeling like you're overeating them.
Yeah, and if you're adding into a meal as well, like it's always quite nice to toast them. You get a bit more flavour, so you don't need as much from them or of them. Hang on. Yeah, no, don't need as many of them. So you can have your like 1 or 2 tablespoons. I'm going back to my curry with the cashews, but just toast them off a little bit first. And they've got like a lot more flavour, a lot more texture, and you'll really notice them. So that can really help in terms of not thinking, oh, there wasn't enough there, if you're a bit concerned about how much you're having.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you said, using them in the sauces too, like a cashew sauce is amazing.
Yeah, so good.
There's a couple more questions coming there that are really interesting. So one is it okay to have eggs daily? The answer is absolutely. Poor eggs got a beating in the 80s from Edwina Currie and the salmonella scare, and then they got a beating about the cholesterol level in them, but they are so nutritious. They're a complete protein. In the yolk, there's all of the fat soluble vitamins, there's loads of choline. They are a dream little package of nutrition, the ultimate supplement wrapped in a shell. So things that you can be tested for. You can be tested for B12, folate, iron, vitamin D, magnesium, and zinc, depending on your GP and how willing they are to test. There's also other tests you can get if you're happy to sort of pay privately. There's lots of great companies now like Medichecks and other testing companies that can run full panels for you as well. But they're the ones that the NHS will generally test for.
Fab. And then I've just got one last question from Hester. That's okay. So similarly, are there any tips for cooking for partners who aren't keen on too many meals without meat, if they are more happy to have more plant-based?
On this, I would say start with your meat curry. So start with a chicken curry, chicken cashew curry, half chicken cashew curry, cashew curry with a little bit of chicken in it. You know, like just try and slide in those plants. What do you think, Amy?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it depends. If the partner wants to reduce meat intake, they might be hard no on that, and that's, you know, that's absolutely fine. So what I would do is make a really kind of whole, well-rounded curry on its own, and then maybe, I don't know, let's say they want, I don't know if steak would go on top of a curry, I don't blooming know, but let's just go with steak because it's all I can think about. Let's just say you like finished off a steak and then had it over the top of like the curry you'd made for yourself, let's say. So they're having the meat, but they're also tasting the incredible finished product curry that you're having without the meat. So not only do they then get the best of both worlds, like Kirsty said as well, actually over time they might then discover that the meat's not really adding much. But then if they want to continue that forever, at least you don't have to make either two different meals or not have what you want to then include the meat still. So you can kind of, yeah, get a bit of both worlds there.
You can also lie to them, like make them a Beyond burger and tell them it's a meat one. It'll take them a while to realize, because Beyond Meat or Impossible burgers are actually very, like, I used to eat meat. I haven't eaten meat for years and years. And I was like, I had it in a restaurant and I was like, I think they've given me a meat one.
I was the exact same way, yeah.
I was like, I'm really not sure here. I had to get them to check.
Yeah, something that works for me as well is, so I am vegetarian, but my husband is vegan. So we just typically make a base vegan meal that, like you said, Amy, I can then add whatever I want. And most of our meals are just, the base is plant-based. And then whoever is within that family, whether they're eating meat, whether they're eating fish, whether they're just a vegetarian, they can add their extras. And it also makes it a bit more, I think, like exciting as well, because it's a bit like a tapas. You're almost adding these extra little bits too, but it's not, you're not making, you know, two exclusively separate meals.
Yeah, no one's missing out then either, are they? Like whoever's adding the extra gets the extra, and you've still got a great meal in front of you without the extras because you choose not to eat them, and that's great.
Fab, thank you so much both. I think we will finish there because we're at 7 o'clock. Like I said, I've posted the link to our next webinar in the chat, so feel free to scroll up. I'll post it again here. Thank you so much both for sharing your knowledge with us today. Hope everyone found it helpful. And yes, hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
We really enjoyed it. Reach out on the communities.
Yeah, for sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.